What has no reason to exist in 2021 and yet it does? The real reason is because these work through clearing houses. So I sell fly swatters online and I hook up with a clearing house. Whenever a client puts in an order for $10, that clearing house takes their own money and puts it in my account. When the money gets drawn from the buyer's account, it goes to the clearing house instead of me. I pay a surcharge of say 3% of each transaction to that clearing house. That clearing house's entire business model is, I make 3% per transaction. I have to make sure that there are not enough NSF/cancellations that I can't recoup that 3% back. So it takes a few days for them to verify that this isn't some mass scam that's going to drain that profit margin. Similar with debit cards. People forget businesses pay for merchant services and processing transactions, including refunds, generates fees. Most merchants process transactions in bulk. This is why you may see a debit card authorization pending for a few days before it posts. Same applies to refunds. Used to be the case. With checks, the Federal Reserve Bank, was the clearing house. Checks were sorted and passed through the Fed to other banks, especially non-local ones. With electronic check presentment, the clearing house, not the Fed anymore, clears the check quickly, often in minutes. Because when you're transferring money between two banks, both banks involved really want to make sure the transaction doesn't get fouled up. With only two parties, that becomes difficult because it's unclear which side of the transaction should be the source of truth as to whether the transaction was completed or not. If Bank A and Bank B are transferring funds, and Bank A says the funds were sent but Bank B says they weren't, you've got a problem that takes some time to resolve. And taking time to untangle transactions is not what banks want because time is money. Clearing houses originally existed to facilitate transactions when they actually involved swapping physical goods. The two sides would both independently give their items to be traded to the clearing house, and once the clearing house was sure it had both sides of the transaction, it would clear it and disperse the results to both parties. The clearing house, being a neutral and otherwise disinterested third party, could be the source of truth as to whether the transaction completed, and neither side could get burned if the other side reneged on the deal because both sides needed to have their chips in the pot before anything happened. Nowadays, clearing houses aren't taking and passing physical stacks of cash and physical stock certificates to clear transactions, but they are still in the business of accepting electronic assets from both sides of a transaction and then handing them over to the other side once both sides have handed over what was agreed. Because the whole process is done with computers now, they're known as automated clearing houses, and that's why bank-to-bank transfers are known as ACH transfers. These transactions still take several days to clear because banks are pretty conservative in their technology, and so the entire financial industry still operates on net settlement, or basically that they process the day's transactions all at once in a big batch overnight. At the end of the first day, T+1, the banks both process the request to do a transaction through the clearing house. At the end of the second day, T+2, the clearing house handles the transaction, and at the end of the third day, T+3, the bank on the other end of the transaction processes the result of the transaction. In the not too distant past, 5-day clearing was standard, but through improvements it was brought down to 3-day clearing. And recently 2-day clearing has started happening, and will be the expected standard in the near future. These transactions don't take several days, as some have said, so the banks can earn interest during the delay, as, in fact, getting the funds into a pool from which they could be lended out and used to earn interest would also take a day, and there's no slack in this process where that could happen. They take several days because it's a multi-step process and only one step of that process can be taken each day. Banks also continue to use clearing houses because it'd be impractical for every bank in the world to have a direct link to every other bank in the world, so instead banks just each all have one link, a link to their country's clearing house, and maybe also additional links to the clearing houses of other nations they enable business with. Used to be the case. With checks, the Federal Reserve Bank, was the clearing house. Checks were sorted and passed through the Fed to other banks, especially non-local ones. With electronic check presentment, the clearing house, not the Fed anymore, clears the check quickly, often in minutes. One word solves all this: blockchain. A lot of banks use their own clearing houses, and in the case of stock brokerages they're often outsourced to take the cost away from the brokerage. If you take a deeper look, Robinhood, M1 Finance, IBKR I believe as well, all clear through Apex Clearing. Anytime you make an ACH, automated clearing house, transfer between banks, that's basically where it goes in and out. Edit. As far as I'm aware this is also why transfers actually can take weeks, but the clearing house basically spots the bank the money and hopes you're good for it. Example is you write a bad check to a business, They go to deposit it and 1 to 5 days later it comes back as bad. It takes a while for either the bank or ACH to actually determine NSF. A direct bank-to-bank transfer wire, but also often through a third party still, costs more money but is actually real-time hours and minutes, and only some banks offer the service. All of this said, ACH is an outdated processing method, but US banks have claimed it would cost too much to upgrade the existing hardware to allow for true instant transfers. I was about to say this. I just made the final payment on my car. For 5 years they have automatically withdrawn the payment, but for the final payment I either had to call or go into the bank. Yesterday I called and the lady said there is a $10 charge for doing it over the phone. So I went into the bank today, and all I did was stand there while the teller clicked a few buttons and it took the money from my checking to pay off the loan. Like, why did any of that need to happen? Just automatically withdraw the money like before. What makes it worse is the last payment was less than my normal payment. Prepayment penalties on cars are annoying. I usually call and ask them to waive the payment. If they will not waive it, I ask what the minimum amount required is to avoid them automatically closing the account. I then pay the balance down to $1 greater and request monthly statements mailed to the house. Then I ask them again if they want to waive the payment because it is now more expensive to see the account than keep it open. I had a car financed through a credit union where they automatically withdrew the payments via electronic draft. At some point I generally wonder how many payments I have left, since I knew I was close, only to realize that I'd already completed my term and was on month 4 of them still taking money out. I call up there and say, hey, why are you still taking money out when the car is paid for? And she said something along the lines of because I didn't call them to let them know. I was completely floored by all of this. At any rate, I'm really surprised at some of this. I work for a large auto finance company where the system we use will automatically calculate that last payment and includes the prorated interest for a true zero balance and can pay it pretty much however you'd want. It's always interesting to see how other companies do things compared to ours. Edit, grammar/spelling. Atant discontinued high-speed internet in my area and offered a different internet service option, claiming it would be just as fast if not faster. It's not, as they are the only provider in the area. I had no choice. I made the switch. Imagine my surprise when they continued billing me for the service they disconnected, took the box out of my home, and didn't even offer in my area anymore. Took nearly 5 months before they finally stopped sending me 2 bills. Gyms are some of the most notorious for being difficult to cancel. A lot of the chain places use a third-party billing service too, which makes it an even bigger headache to do it. And even still, a lot of the time after you cancel in person, you will still mysteriously see charges appear on your credit card. If they have an option to cancel by mail, send it via certified mail, return receipt requested. Hard to ignore something like that when there is legal proof of mailing. As a clerk/salesperson, I'll tell the person to cancel their credit card and get a new one when my manager isn't around. I hate working for this shady business for minimum wage. Just got my degree and I can't wait to start engineering job where I can have some self-respect. The gym recently switched to a third-party payment party who fucks people over with even more apathy. So people call and come in to yell at the front desk person, who are basically just cleaners/security and therapists for people who got fucked over and need someone to yell at. The business practices should be made illegal. It isn't the wage slave you're talking to making it difficult. My apartment complex does that for paying online. It's a 3% fee. I refuse to pay that, so every month I walk my rent check to them directly. And every month they say please pay online next month, and I always say back that I will not pay extra so that they don't have to go to the bank. And then I get emails saying next month please pay online and set up an account, and I ignore that. If you want me to do it so badly, don't charge me extra. Edit, a lot of people are asking, this fee is for e-checks and linking my checking account as well as credit card. In most Canadian and in US jurisdictions, there has to be at least one option to pay that doesn't have an additional fee paid to the landlord. But that doesn't mean that the easy option has to be the free one, and they can usually add convenience fees or whatever to the other options. Generally they're trying to make it hard to pay without the extra fee, and they're allowed to make it as hard as they want as long as it's technically possible. My credit union has a bill pay feature. You can have it automatically pay your bills from a wide variety of bills like cable, electric, gas, etc. by linking the accounts. There is also a miscellaneous one. This miscellaneous bill pay is their check printers automatically sending a check to the person's address every month until a specified end date. It's pretty convenient to someone who needs exactly 12 checks a year. If a customer has a computer disk, then look at it and tell them it's the wrong format. If they use Apple, tell them we're PC. If they use PC, tell them we're Apple. And if they've got both, then tell them we use Linux. And if they've got that, tell them the computers are down. They should be anyhow.